As Donald Trump reshapes America's ideological and diplomatic posture, two fronts of disruption are now defining his second term. At home, elite institutions like Harvard face sweeping crackdowns on international students' enrollment. Abroad, the president's Middle East tour has redefined U.S. foreign policy as a marketplace of deals. Today, we examine how Trump's bans are draining intellectual capital from U.S. campuses and whether his transactional approach to Gulf diplomacy marks a strategic shift or just a political show. I'm Mona Moselhi. Let's get in focus. On international students, beginning with Harvard, has triggered alarm among economists, educators, and global innovators. The Financial Times highlights the scale of disruption. 6,793 students at Harvard alone face potential expulsion under Homeland Security's the SEVP certification. Harvard, among the world's leading academic institutions, argue this is a direct attack not just on its autonomy, but on America's most powerful experts' ideas. Jason Furman, former Obama economic advisor, notes that many of today's industry leaders, including Sundar Pichai and Jensen Huang, came as students and stayed to build transformative enterprises. The administration's claim of combating anti-Semitism is being challenged in court and dismissed by Jewish faculty and students. Critics say this is a populist assault on intellectual pluralism. Beyond litigation, the damage to America's soft power and labor market could be incalculable. Now, joining us from Washington is Mr. Peter Tanis, chairman of Linux Investment Advisory and a longtime observer of the U.S. economic strategy. Mr. Tanis, can I say good evening or good afternoon? Let's begin with this big picture. What do you see as the long-term economic consequences of limiting international students at institutions like Harvard?
Hello, Mona. It's good to be with you and your viewers. The answer to your question, the implication long term would be nothing short of disastrous. But the good news is that this is not likely to be a long-term issue. The idea of banning foreign students coming to Harvard is pretty outrageous, and it probably won't stand. As you know, and as I think you alluded to, a federal judge has already blocked that order, so we'll see where it goes from here.
Now, many argue that innovation ecosystems, particularly in the AI, biotech, and the fintech, are sustained by academic migration. Could this policy sever the pipeline that fuels Silicon Valley?
Yeah, I mean, you just pointed out one of the negatives of a policy like this, and there are many negatives. For example, foreign students represent 1/3 of the freshman class at Harvard. So that alone is a pretty dramatic change. And also, as you pointed out, this goes totally against the American idea of soft power, where we try to use our examples in many different fields as a roadmap for other countries who may want to follow it.
Right. Jason Furman framed this not just as an economic loss, but as a personal one. Do you think the erosion of academic diplomacy harms U.S. influence abroad?
Yeah, the economic side is not particularly important. Harvard is the richest school in America with an endowment over $50 billion. But the other point that you mentioned is definitely the case. This again erodes America's credibility as a nation built on freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and this is one of the reasons why I think we can be optimistic that we're not going to be talking about this a year from now.
Now, the administration's rationale is rooted in national security and anti-Semitism claims. Now, what do you make of the legal challenges and how courts are handling the government's evidence?
Yeah, legally, this clearly won't stand. As you know, one judge has already ruled against it, but then it has to go through the appeals process. The other side of this is that the argument that this is a national security issue is a very thin argument. Most of the arguments are suggesting that Harvard has not done enough in anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is terrible and it should be condemned by everybody. But most of the students who have spoken out against Israel are speaking about Israel's uh, unwanton and terrible killing of innocents in Palestine. That's what most of the students are talking about, and they're not talking about anti-Semitism.
Right. Do you see this targeting of elite institutions as a broader culture war against what some label liberal academia?
I'm sorry, would you repeat that, Mona?
Again, let me hear repeated. Do you see the targeting of elite institutions as a broader culture war against what some label liberal academia?
Yeah, some leaders are having trouble resisting the pressure because, among other things, they're not as prestigious or as rich as Harvard. Harvard can afford to withstand this pressure on many different levels. It's probably the most revered, the most revered institution in America, and it's also the richest. So they come from a different perspective and a stronger position. So they're the ones who should lead the battle against this, and they're likely going to win it.
Now, the $50 billion foreign student economy supports not just universities but also housing, local services, and even state revenues. Could this trigger ripple effects in regional economies?
Now, yeah, I mean, it could, but here again, it's not likely to last. Uh, if we're talking about the restriction on foreigners, if that's what you were talking about, the restriction on foreigners coming into the United States to study, I mean, imagine, this is not something that's going to be that's going to be around for a very long time.
If I may ask you about a certain case of a student, Mahmoud Khalil, who, uh, uh, who was arrested and deported. Uh, what do you have on that?
Yeah, the problem with some of these kids who have been deported or detained is based on very flimsy evidence. One of the things that some people are doing is that anybody who protests Israel's actions against Palestinians are sometimes branded as Hamas supporters, which couldn't be further from the truth. So the one good thing is that the judicial system in the United States is very strong and very powerful and just. So it has to work its way through the judicial system. But in the end,
But at this
I
very
think
particular case, we're speaking about the detention of a student and him being deported. Now, the United with no evidence of so far or any so far evidence. Now, what do you think of that, and how will that reflect on the reputation of the U.S. as the protector of the freedom of speech, the the human rights and all the big uh, uh, slogans that the United States is famous for.
Uh, Bona, you put it perfectly. I mean, it clearly goes against everything the United States stands for. I mean, the idea of deporting students on very slim or no evidence of their misdeeds is as un-American as anything you can think of. But as I said earlier, uh, this will work its way through the courts and will eventually be reversed because it cannot stand. There is very little evidence for these deportations, and in this particular case, very little or none. So we can expect it to be reversed, but it is still a stain on the United States and its reputation because it happened in the first place.
Right. Now, what kind of signal does this send to future global talent pools, considering studying in the United States versus Canada, the UK, or Australia, or other venues?
Yeah, what we have to hope is that these incidents will not, once they are resolved, will not deter students from coming to the United States, and I don't think it will. I mean, we have to hope that this unfortunate passage will be forgotten, and that kids are going to want to come to the United States to study at the great universities here, particularly in the areas that the United States is so popular for, including artificial intelligence, technology, and other areas, business that the students have for many decades longed to come to the United States for. It will be corrected, and it's unfortunate that it happened in the first place.
Right. There's also a diplomatic dimension too. Now, the U.S. embassies often promote American education as soft power. Now, how does this policy affect global perceptions of the U.S. as an academic destination?
Yeah, it doesn't help, does it? I'm involved in a way. I'm on the board of trustees of Lebanese American University in Beirut. This is a perfect example of soft power. And if you want to give an example of soft power,
Mm.
the new leaders in Lebanon, the president is a graduate of Lebanese American University, and the prime minister taught at American University of Beirut. It doesn't get any better than this as an example of soft power. So it's important that we continue this.
Well, universities like Harvard are fighting back in court, and we all know that. But do you think they should be more politically proactive in defending academic independence?
We active. I mean, we're asking a lot of some of these students and these kids to go against this tide of opposition that has swelled around them. Some will anyway. We had a recent example here in Washington of a young lady who made some comments at her graduation from George Washington University here in Washington, and they were entirely based on the murder of civilians in Gaza. And she got into trouble. She was not, her degree was not revoked, but she got a lot of criticism for it. It takes a lot of courage to do this, and not everybody is up to it.
So, do you think there could be a role that can be played by the business community, especially those companies founded or led by former international students, in pushing back against these restrictions?
Yes, and some are. And again, keep in mind that the big corporate leaders in America are leading companies that are held publicly, and they have to account to their shareholders. So they've got to be very careful that whatever position they take with respect to some of the issues you and I are talking about does not affect the company and the shareholders of the company to which they also owe allegiance. So it's tricky.
Lastly, in this segment, is this is just about visas, or are we witnessing a more fundamental shift in how America values knowledge and immigration?
Uh, the American economy is essentially a knowledge economy. Uh, we haven't been the great manufacturing economy for over 50 or 60 years. So knowledge remains at the forefront of what America is known for. That will continue. It should not, these incidents should not damage it. They will get resolved. One thing about Trump is when when he makes some of these outrageous pronouncements, he tends to find a way to walk them back. So let's try to be a little optimistic here.
Yeah, let's let's do that. Now, please stay with us, Mr. Tanis, as we shift to our second segment. And as campuses close the doors to the world, the question is whether America is waiting off or walling off not just its border but its future. If Trump's domestic crackdown sends a message of exclusion, his overseas tour sent another message entirely. America is open for business, no questions asked. Our next segment takes us to the Gulf, where transactional diplomacy is quickly replacing traditional alliances.
Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully take office of President of the United States.
Capitol open, the Americans and reciprocity.
Mexico, Canada, Greenland.
Now, President Donald Trump's whirlwind Middle East tour spanning Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar signaled a striking recalibration of U.S. regional strategy. Foreign policy outlines a series of blockbuster agreements over $2 trillion in investment, AI infrastructure, partnerships, and defense contracts, all anchored by a promise of no more lectures from Washington. Lifting sanctions on Syria and skipping Israel on the itinerary further underscored a shift away from legacy alliances. Gulf states welcomed the approach, leveraging sovereign wealth and AI potential to cement ties with Washington, while also hedging bets with China. Critics warn the U.S. may be trading long-term strategic influence for short-term economic gains, while Trump supporters hail it as a return to pragmatic, realpolitik. He's watching and recalculating. And still with us, Mr. Peter Tanis, to help us unpack the implication of this new Gulf pragmatism. And Mr. Tanis, back to you again. And Trump's tour delivered historic sums of investment, but at what costs to traditional U.S. diplomatic leverage?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, Mona? Sorry, I didn't get that.
Again. Let me hear. Trump tour delivered a historic sum of investments, and that we have seen all. But at what costs to traditional U.S. diplomatic leverage?
It's very interesting. So on this subject, let's talk about his recent trip to the Middle East, which in my opinion was enormously successful on many different levels. As you pointed out in the introduction, the China was making great inroads in the Gulf area, and the United States had to counter that. Trump went over on a basically transactional trip where he did a whole bunch of business deals that will, frankly, favor both sides. Will favor the Arab countries that did them, and it will favor the United States businesses. And on top of that, he made diplomatic overtures that most presidents were very reluctant to make. He talked to the new Syrian president, lifted the sanctions on Syria. He's currently engaged in peace negotiations with Iran to do a nuclear energy deal. So these have been very, very positive aspects on U.S. foreign relations.
You spoke here about lifting the sanctions from Syria. Now, that was made with no conditions. So do you see this as a strategic recalibration or a kind of transactional misstep.
Yeah, and again, I'm sorry, Mona, but I didn't get most. I didn't understand
Right,
most
you
of your.
spoke about lifting sanctions on
Yes.
Syria. So, and that were made with no conditions, without conditions. So, do you see this as a strategic recalibration or a transactional misstep?
Yeah, it's both. Now, first of all, there are conditions. The lifting of the sanctions was temporary. Like most of the other things he's done, there was a deadline to them. And it's essentially a message to Syria, let's see how you behave while the sanctions are lifted. And if we, the United States, consider that you're doing the right thing for Syria and for the region, and peace in the region, then the sanctions will stay lifted, and we want to help Syria rebuild. He's essentially delivering the same message to Iran. If we make a deal, we're going to help Iran's economy enormously by lifting sanctions that have hurt Iran tremendously. And if we don't make a deal, oh, by the way, Israel may bomb you. So this is how these negotiations are going, which are very different from those in the past.
Trump's approach was well received in Riyadh. Now, how do you interpret this posture in the context of past U.S. Middle East policy?
I mean, it's pretty much a step in the right direction. I mean, yes, Trump is very transactional, and these deals will benefit both Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, and the United States. As you pointed out, some of these approach $1 trillion in transactions. And at the same time, as we pointed out, the president is making diplomatic overtures to some of the enemies that we've had in the past. So as far as I'm concerned, I view this very positively as a step in the right direction, and hopefully we're going to start seeing some of the positive effects of this in the coming weeks.
Now, with over $2 trillion pledged, many wonder whether U.S. foreign policy is now for sale. How valid is that concern?
Yeah, it's an issue, but not an important one. The fact that we are doing business deals that advantage both countries is favorable.
Both countries. You're speaking here advantage both sides.
Yes, indeed.
Right. In which way is it benefiting the other side or the Middle East side of the story here?
Sure. Let's take Saudi Arabia, for example. Saudi Arabia is under its, frankly, visionary leadership, is doing its best to expand its economy away from its single source of income of the past, which obviously is oil. And it's doing it by adapting to some of the great technologies of the future. Saudi Arabia is very interested in artificial intelligence. The United States makes the most productive artificial intelligence chips in the world. And there's a deal on the table to help the Saudis by allowing us to export to the Saudis some of our most important chips.
So you will export to the Saudis the chips and the technology, but you will not give them the know-how of it, right?
No, the Saudis will have what they need to help develop their AI. There will be some defense and some security issues, of course, but basically this deal will advantage the Saudis and will allow them to pretty much to do what they want to do and help them develop. So this is an answer to your question of how it helps the Saudis.
Right.
Similarly for the UAE, which has similar advantages, and of course for the United States, huge purchases of defense equipment, Boeing airplanes, which is going to help the U.S. and employ a lot of workers.
Indeed. Do you believe Trump's absence from Israel and Iran in this visit suggests a new set of regional priorities?
Yeah, again, I think you said, I'm not sure I understood the question. Sorry, Mona.
Again, let me repeat that. Do you believe Trump's absence from Israel and Iran in this visit, particularly Israel, suggests
Yeah,
a
well, I
new
mean,
set of regional priorities?
yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? I'm glad you brought that up. The fact that he snubbed Israel on this trip when Israel very much wanted to have him visit tells you another part of the story. The United States is not happy with Israel on many different levels. And that obviously is a completely other subject. But it's important that the President of the United States had the courage to do that. Obviously, he's not going to be visiting with Iran. He's got his Secretary of State and other negotiators who are already where they're already meeting as we speak to talk about a possible Iran deal. Hopefully, something positive will come of that. There is a problem with that issue because the Iranians are fear that the United States wants them to give up entirely on nuclear energy, which they're not willing to do.
Mm,
But the Iranians have signaled that they are willing
mm.
to give up any ability to make an atomic weapon, which is really the primary concern. So we've got to
Uh,
hope that something will be worked out.
yes, we hope something would be worked out, and that would be another topic that we'll be speaking about. Mr. Tanis, we thank you so much for being here with us. And with the classrooms closed and coffers opened, the Trump doctrine seems clear: profit over principle. But in a world shaped by power and perception, every handshake has its price. Now, I guess that from intellectual borders to geopolitical bargains, this episode reveals the contours of New America, one that punishes knowledge and prizes capital. But in turning away students and turning towards gifts, what kind of future is the United States actually building? Let's keep the world in focus. Until next time, many thanks for watching.